A big new retention and free agency isn't even here yet for the Minnesota Lynx. Clare Duwelius, newly promoted, is here to chat all about the Lynx and her path here. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Well, hi, everybody, and happy Wednesday. I am Howard Megdal, founder and editor over at The Next, where you can see our reporting on women's basketball 24/7, 365. We have over 100 reported pieces every single month. TheNextHoops.com is where you get it. Sign up for our free newsletter, or for $9 a month, $72 a year, support the work that's being done there. And I want to thank you for making us, our group, your first listen every day at Locked On Women's Basketball. We cover 5 days a week, everything women's basketball. Saturday is all about the WNBA draft. Make sure you're subscribing at YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And somebody who has, I think, a fairly acute interest in the 2023 WNBA draft would be the newly named general manager, but longtime mainstay here in Minnesota, Clare Duwelius, who joins us. Clare, congratulations, first of all, on the promotion, and kind of take me through, if you could. You said something yesterday at the media avail about how this was like a bit of a mountaintop moment for you in your life in basketball, which extends, of course, to your playing days. What was that exact moment? What are you feeling? Who are you talking to when you hear that this promotion is happening, it's done, and you've signed officially?
Yeah, obviously just the initial thing was elation, right off the bat. It'll be one of those memories for me that I'll never forget, sitting in Cheryl's office with her. And when she was just talking to me one-on-one about it, and had to, hold my chest really quick. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And I've obviously worked really hard to kind of put myself in this position, but opportunities like this wouldn't be available for people unless, great mentors and bosses like Cheryl kind of bring you along. And that's luckily the situation that I've been in.
What's so striking to me, and this is throughout sort of the women's basketball space and really the women's sports space, is that you're part of a generation that is essentially getting into jobs that you couldn't have necessarily conceived of as you're growing up. These were just not positions that were readily available. Front offices, as you know, even as far back as a few years ago when you first started, were relatively skeletal comparatively to where they are now. And so for you, I wonder, when did front office WNBA become something that was on your radar?
Yeah, coming up through the women's game and being a former athlete, collegiate athlete myself, I have always had my eyes on opportunities like this. But again, to your point, it's not obviously always reflective of, you don't see a lot of young women that are holding these kinds of positions. And so to now have people that you can kind of see and look up to is really important. And I think just so proud of where the game has grown to, and that I can be a part of it.
What would have been your top before this, when you look back at your basketball life? I mean, you've played, you've done this in so many different ways. What was it? What did CM knock out of the top spot?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. This is pie in the sky kind of opportunity. And I'm so grateful, like I mentioned, but probably some other job relating to teams. I've always loved being part of a team. Obviously my first love and passion is basketball. So something maybe in that regard. Coaching wasn't super my cup of tea when I dabbled in it a little bit for a couple of years, but certainly appreciate just being part of a team and wanting to represent women's sports specifically.
And obviously, just for this to happen, in a period of time where you are a new mother as well, and does it resonate in a different way as you have that responsibility as well? It's obviously some fundamental life changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I start beaming whenever I talk about being a parent. It's a greatest joy that I've really enjoyed these last 7 months. George is about to be 8 months old here in the first part of the year. So just it's awesome to, kind of, it's a lot of hats. I was going to say, my counterparts can also agree that a lot of times when you're coming up through the operations world, you're wearing a ton of hats, and front offices alike, because, before there's a lot of head coaches and GMs that were doing everything with the dual roles. And so I'm just proud that I've been well practiced. Now I can be a parent and I can still do my job and succeed at both. And George is just the light of our lives. So we're, having a ton of fun with that at home.
And as a point of personal privilege, is adorable. So as a parent myself, may I just, I wish nothing more than for your most important phone calls to line up with nap time. That is
right,
all
exactly.
you ever ask.
That's the key.
So it is, and I mentioned at the top, a very interesting time to be figuring out what you're going to be looking to do in the draft. And I guess before you even get to the question of your process, which I think is really interesting in and of itself, the fact that, all right, we've had a lottery, you guys end up with the second overall pick. One of the fun things I enjoy doing is asking people who they think the number one draft pick is going to be in this draft, so that, I can elicit laughter in response. Everyone has a sense of it. And so from that perspective, knowing that, it changes what the 2 pick usually is, right? Normally the 2 pick is so dependent on figuring out scenarios and scenario planning here. But unless, I mean, the way I've written is, unless the earth crashes into the sun, Aaliyah Boston's going at 1. And so you can pretty reliably plan on and make a plan accordingly. Is there a sense of relief that comes with that, knowing that, look, you essentially have the second number 1 pick, where it's whoever you so choose?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does help knowing that things are quote unquote locked in. It lets you kind of alleviate some of the question marks, so you can better position yourself in planning. And all of that is very true. I think there's a lot of really great prospects out there. We are busy in every off season going out and seeing these players one-on-one, and spending a lot of time doing the background work of, deep dive into what they're all about on and off the court, and just kind of what kind of fit that they would be with the Minnesota Lynx specifically. And so I think a lot of that gets sorted out as we do our recon, talk to a lot of different people and coaches and anyone that's really been a part of these prospects' lives and in their inner circle. Whatever we can learn is really valuable to us.
And it's interesting because this is a turning point in so many different ways for the Minnesota Lynx, right? Okay, we understand that it's Cheryl locked in for the long term going forward, which is something that was not fully established when the last whistle was blown for this WNBA season. It's a time at which you obviously are replacing a critical member of this franchise in Sylvia Fowles. And it's a time at which, and I think in no small part, a reason that you have proven so valuable to this franchise is because there's been this balancing of short-term and long-term priorities. You guys repeatedly have been a playoff team while also setting up an offseason where you have north of $500,000 in cap space, and a draft that includes not just 2, but 12, 15, 24, and 27. It's a chance to really put your stamp on it. And I guess I wonder to what extent you've kind of taken that step back here as we head into what will be obviously the busiest of the season for you, with free agency and the final months of the draft, to think about, this is really an opportunity to create what the Lynx are going to look like for, arguably the rest of the decade.
Of course. Yeah. And it is, it'll be a long-term plan that we're kind of putting together, but every facet that you mentioned is of utmost importance, and we don't take any subsection of those details lightly. We have to nail every bit of it, and it means free agency, it means draft planning. We're obviously elated that Cheryl is here for the long haul, and everything that she envisions for our organization and franchise is, I'm just grateful to be surrounded by, in my opinion, the best, and that's true for our coaching staff as well. So yeah, we'll take every part of it very seriously, and we're open to kind of all options at this point, because we know that what we need to do to kind of get Lynx back into the expectation that we hold ourselves in, and being playoff teams and championship contenders. We expect that of ourselves. So that's obviously the goal, and we are looking to get back there in the immediate. So
I'm excited. I want to dive into your process with that. First, I want to tell the listeners about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget. Book an SUV or minivan for a family road trip, a pickup truck for some errands, or even test drive an electronic vehicle. Every trip is backed by a liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions may apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. All right. So when we talk process, when we talk about trying to think through the draft, you talk about, essentially personal intelligence is obviously so important. Being able to talk to people who are around the players, being able to get that information. Where do you start? Are you starting in the film room? Are you starting on the stat page? Like, what is your sort of opening gambit when trying to figure out how you're evaluating a player?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. We kind of start on a more broad sense, and we get our pool of players that we have interest in, and then we really take a deep dive, and it can be as granular as we can, get our hands on. And so I think that's where we really start. And then the process, and something that I enjoy, is when we're out at scouting trips. I personally enjoy going to the practices and the shoot arounds and that kind of thing, because you just see a different lens. Obviously, when the bright lights are on and the game time, it's a big game. It's easy to see what everyone sees with these players, but I want to see when it's the nitty gritty at practice and things aren't going their way, maybe, or they're not hitting shots, or coaches are getting after them a little bit. Like, how do those players respond in those moments? I think that's really telling, and so that's more like a avenue to the process. And then I think it's easy for a lot of franchises to tell which players, maybe analytically or from a stats perspective, who could shake out in the WNBA. Mm-hmm. I think it's those kind of intangibles that help set other prospects aside from another.
So it's personal first, and then you're looking at where the numbers come into play, where those correspond is what I'm hearing.
I think, you start with just a general basis of talent. Mm-hmm. If they can't hack it from a physical perspective, then maybe it's not as necessary to go down into a granular deep dive. But so I'd say we start there, where we kind of do the evaluation of the player itself. And then we really like to get in to know everything that makes that player tick, and what their interests are, and a bunch of other different questions that we have.
Is it hard to utilize stats properly when you're dealing with people who are typically 18 to 22 years old, who are, in most cases, bodies still developing,
Sure.
Still figuring out who they are as players? And do you find that inherently limiting when you say, all right, even trying to figure out what the true talent level is? You're talking about a player who maybe you got 30 games on, and a lot of them might even be non-conference games where the level of competition isn't telling you anything about what that player can do against other WNBA level players, right?
Yeah. And I think it's, you can take a historical look at some of the current players in the WNBA and see how they kind of panned out in their collegiate years. I also think that you have to be able to evaluate, and this is more subjective, but what their ceiling could be. So do they have the raw material, so to speak, to kind of lean in to be a, whatever tier player in the WNBA? Would it be a tier one player? Those are kind of easy, right? Because exactly if they're going to be a generational talent, that most times. And so I think that's kind of leans into the evaluation process, and you lean on, legends like Cheryl and Katie and people that have been in the league for a very long time. And Rebecca, obviously, like, I'm surrounded with a lot of really smart, talented people that know their business. So that's why we really enjoy our staff conversations that we have every couple of weeks and that sort of thing. So
it's really interesting. And the W has this in a way that other leagues don't. You have institutional knowledge back to the very beginning of the league. You have this opportunity to be able to make comps throughout league history, which is something I think remarkable. 26 years is a lot of time, and in some ways it's not a lot of time at all. And so
Right.
sort of
You
come-
should see Katie Smith. We call her the comp queen because she can compare any player in the draft prospect pool, and she is like, oh yeah, they're kind of like this, and so she's fun to bounce ideas off of too.
when we had Katie in New York, that was a delightful thing as well. And so New York's loss is, of course, Minnesota's gain.
Oh yeah, I'm here for that.
And Katie can even do comps to the ABL.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
To go across that as well. But no, that is always a fun game to play without question. So somebody who I think you struggle with a comp for is Sylvia Fowles. And, somebody who, I've made this point. I think there's not a real serious argument to be made that anyone else is the best five in the history of the league. With apologies to Lisa Leslie, this is her value is somewhere, you go by win shares, and she's somewhere 10 to 15% higher. You look at what she was able to do in her 30s after what she was able to do in her 20s. She arguably became a better player in her 30s, which you basically never see. And so when you think about replacing her, even just from like a value perspective, you guys have a lot of different weapons you can throw at it from the draft to free agency. But how do you go about doing that? How do you go about planning for life after Sil, just from a productivity standpoint alone?
Sure. It's a good question. And I think, it's somewhat similar to if you lose one of your best players to an injury, let's say, for instance, like it's not up to just one person to kind of fill that gap. It's going to take a joint effort from, a lot of different players. And so that'll be the goal because, of course, you mentioned, and I share the same opinion that Syl's the best center to ever play the game. And beyond that, she's one of the most incredible human beings that, I think most people are privy to. So I think that'll be the goal. We just need to kind of find ways that we can become competitive across, the line 1 through 5. So, but certainly we would not turn away from any generational talent either. So I think, just kind of chipping in from a joint effort standpoint.
You're saying, to getting the next Sylvia Fowles on the roster.
I would not turn them away. Yeah.
It seems like a very reasonable perspective to take.
Thank you.
There are a lot of other free agents here. Obviously you've got Rachel Banham, who is right in town at the moment, and coaching as well. When you think about the free agents who you have here, I know Bridget Carlton as well is a restricted free agent. Mariah Jefferson, who did a lot of great things for you guys, is UFA as well. Is it a bit of a holding pattern as you think about those things? I know the calendar sped up a little bit, so you're able to negotiate first. How do you balance that? Because especially for this team where there's a lot of cap space, there's a lot of people who are going to be available, figuring out how you prioritize those things, just take me through sort of that process for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And we keep close tabs on our players that are overseas, playing with their international teams and just to, make sure that we're supporting them and following their journeys over there. And I think right now, we're just keeping all of our options open and we'll be certainly open to talking with our players that we had that are currently free agents and restricted free agents. They did a lot of things for us last season, a lot of stuff that we can be proud of. And I think, keeping that door open and lines of communication open is definitely something we'll be doing.
In terms of free agents, in terms of opportunities to go elsewhere, this has obviously been an offseason that was of potential change for you as well. And so when you think through, I guess the way I would put it is this way, any of us can open a weather app and we can see that there are some places where it's actually sunny a lot more of the time, a lot more of the year. And the weather is, let us say, warmer as well. And so as you sort of think through that world, what was it here in Minnesota that ultimately drew you to wanting to be here and be part of this build? And how hard was it to think that through, given how many opportunities there were around the league?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think there's a bunch of different facets to that I went into considering. For me, Minnesota is home, and I've made a home with my family here, and I love the cities and everything. That was like a very general part of it, but going into it more deeply is being affiliated with Cheryl and the Minnesota Lynx and her vision and the amount of passion she comes to work with every day is something that I always want to emulate and also kind of give off. And so, not to say that there's other, places that exist like that throughout the league that are sunnier, in your words, I'm sure that they are, but for me, I have such a belief and passion and loyalty to this franchise because of everything it's given me. And I believe that we'll do everything we can in our power here in the offseason and beyond that will make us competitive and even more than that in the seasons to come.
And just as a point of personal privilege to see up and coming executives here in this league getting opportunities, the fact that there is a demand for that. I talked to Cheryl about this as it related to her. Cheryl in her professional lifetime has had multiple franchises yanked out from under her and ceased to exist. And so to go from that to go to there being other teams offering, there being competition for top level franchise talent at the executive level too, feels like the game is growing. And I wonder, beyond just your personal circumstances, how much you feel like that is meaningful as a measurement of where the WNBA is.
Yeah, it makes my heart swell, honestly, Howard, because a lot of the people that have been given opportunities, I've kind of grown up with in this league. And so we've kind of come from the same grassroots positions, and it gives you a unique situation where you get to learn franchises in the league from the ground up and position ourselves to kind of feel like we really have our fingerprint on it too. So I think it's been really cool, and it is heartwarming because it shows how much the game has grown, and no longer can you really get away with having dual roles. There's too much to do in the off season for these. So it's nice that we get to kind of split it up and tackle it together. And I'm just really happy that I get to do it with someone that I admire and trust so much. So
I want to talk about her legacy too. I do first want to talk to our listeners about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. As I have shared with my listeners before, the fact that the WNBA, the fact that college basketball, men's and women's, are all there. I'm not a betting person myself, but I know that that is part of finding equality in this space, is making sure that there is the ability to bet on women, quite literally in this case. So head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. And so I mentioned Cheryl. I mentioned prior to this, thinking about the Detroit Shock ceasing to exist, right? I mean, this easily, what Cheryl has built in Minnesota is something she could have built in Detroit if she had simply been empowered to do so.
Right.
Something she could have built in Charlotte. It's something she could have built in Cleveland. And so to instead be part of sort of that larger legacy, Minnesota, and something generational here from, quite frankly, from the business side, what Carly Knox has done, to the basketball side, and that run of playoff appearances. And we cannot predict the future, but it's very hard for me to envision a scenario with 5 picks and $540,000 in cap space and with the talent that you already have coming back, that the playoffs are not in your immediate future as well, ahead of, what should be a sustained run, all of which is sort of a long preamble. And I apologize for it be saying to you, when you think about being part of that, when you think being part of something that is not just a franchise in the WNBA, but a chance to be kind of a pace setter for when we talk about this era in women's basketball, how powerful is that as a motivator? How powerful is that when you come into work every day?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's huge for us. It's something we always talk about, like, who wants to be mediocre? Certainly I don't. Certainly Cheryl doesn't. We don't want that for our franchise. We always want to be the most competitive we can be. And so it's obviously a huge part of what we're going to try to accomplish here in the immediate future. I mean, we are not satisfied without being not being in a playoff scenario. So really hoping that we kind of do that here immediately, and then Yeah, I mean, just Cheryl has obviously, and Carly, they've been through a lot with the league, and it's pretty amazing that they have had this amount of sustained success and they have continued on. Obviously, you do it the right way, and things a lot of times will take care of itself. So
It all makes sense. My last one for you is just, and this is mostly procedural, but given Mila and her existence for Fee, I just wonder if she and George have raced, if that's something, if you plan a baby race for
yeah,
the 23 season ahead. I know
I
that's
think we should. I think we absolutely should. Mila is already crawling, and George sadly is not. So he needs to get in the weight room and start practicing a little bit. But we'll see what we can do for that. I think that would be a lot
off-season
of fun.
program. Good, good. Well, we'll make sure we cover it. And so, Claire, I appreciate your time on all of this. And to our listeners, thank you, of course, for making us your first listen every day. Go ahead and check out Locked On Sports today for your second listen. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and take of the day, available on Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. We will be back with you guys tomorrow, talking women's basketball as we do every day. Until then, I am Howard Megdal, wishing you a wonderful Wednesday.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.